Greetings and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me again today is the Center Square's Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief, Casey Harper. How are you, Casey?
Doing good, Dan. How are you?
Doing good, Casey, but kind of a crazy week, but they all seem to be crazy. The standoff between the state of Texas and the Biden administration over the border crisis just boiled over this week. U.S. Supreme Court started the week by siding with the Biden administration in its attempt to prevent Governor Abbott from and Texas National Guard troops, public safety troopers, from erecting a border wire fence in Eagle Pass, Texas, near the border, near the Rio Grande River. Some interpret it as saying that Texas can no longer put up the border wire fence, but all really the Supreme Court ruling did was say that the federal government had a right to tear down that wire. So Governor Abbott doubled down, had his troops start building more and more and more wire. The Biden administration said, hey, you can't do that. You got to take it down. A number of governors across the state or across the United States, Republican governors, have rallied to defend what Governor Abbott's doing. It really looks like it's heading to bigger trouble. Casey, why don't you weigh in here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. I think there is, as you said, some initial confusion about what the Supreme Court case really says. There is, said in addition to the confusion, there's a long history on this issue. Anyone who, flips on the TV or turns on this podcast and says, hey, it's just some barbed wire, what's the big deal? Well, there's a lot going into this, and this has really become symbolic of years and years of battle over border policy and the implications it has on states like Texas. And then in addition to that, there is a growing coalition of states, which is kind of a new thing on this issue. For a long time, border states have lamented the border illegal immigration, but it has gone from being just a border state issue, just a few of the most conservative governors issue, to really a nationwide coalition of opposition, in particular against the Biden administration and the way they've handled the border crisis. So why is that? A few quick facts here. There have been about 10 million illegal immigrants who have come across the border since Biden took office, Dan. I know we've talked about this. Yeah, we've talked about this number a lot, but that's more than the population of about 40 U.S. states. So this is not a small number. It's big. That would be more than New York City, than any of the largest cities in America. So it's a huge number of people. If you've seen the videos at the border, this is not just, women and children and sick old grandmas dragging themselves across the border, to find a hospital. I mean, this is a lot of military-age men, as some have called it, and as some even pointed out in a letter that we're going to discuss here in a moment. But these are young men, and they seem like they're not all just desperate, young women and children. Now, that doesn't set aside the problem there is with children being trafficked across the border. There's the fentanyl coming across, which is very poisonous. There is the human trafficking element, and so it's all just kind of balled up into this battle between these border states, in particular led by Abbott versus Biden. They've been going back and forth. Abbott has been busing migrants to sanctuary cities, which has really been upsetting these Democrat mayors, and they've been complaining to Biden, which is a very big development. It's no longer partisan. We have Democratic mayors who are raising concerns about immigration to the White House. And then there's just this belief, Dan, before I hand it back to you, that for whatever the Biden administration says, they don't actually want to close the border. They say they do. They blame Republicans, but they don't actually want to. And this wire issue has really given a very vivid picture of what Republicans believe on this, which is, if you really want to close the border, why are you taking down the concertina wire? If it's really, you really want to close the border, then what's wrong with us helping you? And if you don't want us to help you, it might show that you don't actually want to close the border yourself.
But the Biden administration would say the wire fencing doesn't belong there, at least not erected by Texas, state of Texas people, because it's a federal issue. And the state is preventing the federal government from doing its job. But Abbott would say, well, that's exactly the point. You're not doing your job, federal government, Biden administration. That's why we're putting up the border fencing. You mentioned more than 10 million people have crossed the border illegally since Biden took office. Texas is bearing the brunt of that. They by far have the widest, longest southern border with Mexico. Let's reference the young military-aged men who are crossing in this letter that you referenced. Last night, we broke a story at thecentersquare.com that 10 retired FBI executives and other national security experts sent a letter to Congress raising huge concerns about what's going on at the border, calling it perilous for America, and noting that these military-age men who are coming from the border, many of them as gotaways, which is the term the federal government uses to call those who illegally enter between ports of entry, go unapprehended, make their way into the country, and then disappear into the United States somewhere, that they're coming from not just, Mexico or Latin American companies, they're coming from China, from Russia, to America's sworn enemies. And they've raised in this letter to Congress, they raised serious concerns that a terrorist attack could be imminent.
Yeah, and this is not just a couple of, Trump administration FBI officials. These are top FBI officials across 7 presidential administrations. So I think that's important to know. This is not just, a couple of Trump guys trying to stir up trouble for Biden. This is 7 presidential administrations. And you referenced the terror attacks. We know, Dan, from the terror watch list and from the FBI data, or the federal data, rather, that we have people on the terror watch list coming into the country all the time who are apprehended. And we have no idea how many come into the country, how many of those gotaways were on the terror watch list or connected to people on the terror watch list, because we've apprehended hundreds of people who were on the list of known or suspected terrorists or terror connections. And so this isn't a hypothetical. I think that's important to point out. We're not fear mongering. We're not saying, and hey, some of these people could be terrorists. We actually know that some of them, many of them, hundreds of them were on the terror watch list. And that doesn't count the ones that got away that were never processed, which of course we have no idea of knowing who they were, what their intentions are, how long they're staying, and even what they brought into the country with them.
Right. And now, as we said, the Republican governors are rallying to defend Abbott and his border security efforts, known as Operation Lone Star. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is visiting Texas today. Again, we're recording this on Friday, January 26th. She's visiting Texas to stand in solidarity. Solidarity. Thank you, Casey, for picking me up there. Solidarity with Texas there. And I mean, who knows where this is headed? Just the way the Biden's holding firm on its stand, Governor of Texas is holding firm on his stance, and then all these 25 Republican governors from around the country are standing with Abbott. I mean, is there going to be some sort of a potential standoff, whether it be legally or I just don't know. It's heading to dangerous territory. Right. It seems like to me.
And I know I agree, and I know we're running out of time here, but when Abbott, the governor of Texas, posted this open letter. And when you read this letter, it reads as if he is preparing the moral framework, the legal framework, the philosophical framework for secession. And I know that that's almost something that people laugh off. And, there's been jokes about Texas seceding for years and years. But and it still is, I think, unlikely to happen. I want to be clear on that. But whether he is actually planning to do it or whether he is just trying to put that idea in the minds of his supporters, Abbott is throwing out things that clearly read and sound like secession. He's citing the founding fathers and talking about how the federal government has broken its compact with the states, and how, and we even have, conservative voices online calling for the men of Texas to rise up and defend their state. And so I think we are, the border crisis has been happening for a long time. States have been upset about it for a long time, but we have crossed some kind of line and we're in some kind of new uncharted territory. It does feel more perilous, Dan, I agree. And it's all happening, and maybe to Trump's benefit, in an election year when Trump is the immigration candidate in an immigration year standoff. And I think politically, it will benefit him. And I think this is the last thing the Biden administration wants to be talking about and wants us to be talking about right now.
Casey, we could go on, but as you referenced, we are out of time. Listeners can keep up with all of the developing stories on the border crisis at thecentersquare.com. I'm sure Casey and I will be talking about this regularly in the coming weeks and months on America in Focus. For Casey Harper, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.
Enjoying our podcast? Your reviews help other listeners find our show. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen.